never planned on stopping at the Sycamore Motel. The road had stretched endlessly beneath my headlights for hours, the yellow dashes bleeding into one another like Morse code for exhaustion. I wasn't supposed to be out this late. Hell, I wasn't even supposed to be on this road. My GPS rerouted me after a construction detour, feeding me into the backroads where even the stars seemed reluctant to follow. Then, just as my eyelids started to betray me, the neon vacancy sign blinked through the trees like an artificial lighthouse. A small, single-story building slouched under the weight of years gone by. Faded green paint peeled off the siding like sunburnt skin. But I wasn't in any position to be picky. I needed sleep more than comfort. The parking lot was empty, save for one rusty pickup truck near the end of the lot. I figured it belonged to the owner, or maybe a long hauler catching a few hours of sleep like me. The lobby smelled of dust and something faintly metallic, like old coins. A small bell sat on the counter next to a cracked plastic sign that read, "Night Manager on duty, ring for service." I hesitated before tapping the bell. The chime echoed too loudly in the silence, followed by an uncomfortable stretch of nothing. Just as I was about to turn around and leave, a door behind the counter creaked open. The man who emerged didn't look like any night manager I'd ever seen. His skin was too pale, like he hadn't stepped outside in days, and his eyes didn't quite meet mine when he spoke. "Room for the night?" His voice was low, almost raspy. "Yeah, just for a few hours," I replied. He slid a key across the counter. An actual key, not one of those electronic cards you find everywhere now. "Room 12. I handed over some cash without asking for a receipt. Something about this place made me want to leave as little of myself behind as possible. The room wasn't much. Stale air, yellowed curtains, a bed with a comforter that felt like it hadn't been washed in weeks. But the lock worked, and the door closed with a solid click. That's all I needed. I lay on the bed, shoes still on, and closed my eyes. But sleep didn't come. It was too quiet. No cars on the road outside. No hum from the heater. Just silence, thick and heavy, wrapping around the room like a damp blanket. I tried to convince myself it was just the exhaustion playing tricks on me, until I heard it. A soft tap 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 on the wall behind the bed. I froze. Maybe it was the pipes. Maybe someone in the room next door. But when I looked at the key on the nightstand, an unsettling realization hit me. Room 12. The motel only had 12 rooms. Mine was the last one on the row. There shouldn't have been anyone next door. The tapping came again, louder this time, closer, like someone was dragging their fingers across the wall, searching for a weak spot. I sat up, every nerve in my body screaming for me to leave. But the road was dark, and I was too tired to think straight. Just get through the night, I told myself. Leave first thing in the morning. I turned off the bedside lamp and lay back down. That's when I heard the voice. A whisper, soft but clear, as if spoken right into my ear. "You shouldn't be here." The whisper wasn't a trick of exhaustion. I knew what I heard, every syllable soaked in breathless malice, the kind of voice that doesn't belong to anyone living. I shot up from the bed, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. The room was empty. Of course it was empty. But the air felt wrong. Thick, like the atmosphere right before a storm breaks, and suddenly I was aware of every sound or the lack of them. No crickets outside. No wind through the cracks in the old window. Just my own breathing, sharp and fast. Then the tapping started again. But this time it wasn't behind me. It was under the bed. I stared at the floor for what felt like an eternity, muscles locked in place, refusing to obey the survival instincts screaming in my brain. The tapping grew faster, more frantic, tap 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 tap, like impatient fingers drumming against wood. I couldn't stay frozen forever. I had to know. Holding my breath, I leaned over the side of the bed and slowly lowered my head to peer underneath. Nothing. No hands. No face. Just the hollow darkness stretching beyond what little light reached under there. A wave of relief washed over me, absurd and fleeting. Then the mattress shifted beneath me from the inside. The springs groaned as something moved inside the bed, right under my body, pressing upward just enough for me to feel the weight shift. My breath hitched, too scared to move, too scared to stay still. "Get out." The voice whispered again, this time directly into my skull, bypassing my ears altogether. Every inch of me screamed for escape, but before I could launch myself off the bed, I heard the click of the door unlocking. I hadn't touched the lock. The door creaked open by itself, inch by inch, revealing a slice of the dimly lit parking lot outside. But instead of freedom waiting beyond, the hallway was pitch black, darker than night, darker than anything that should exist. And then I saw it. A figure standing just outside the doorframe. Tall, unmoving. Its features were swallowed by the dark except for one thing, its eyes. They gleamed like two shards of broken glass, catching the faint glow of the vacancy sign outside. I couldn't move. My body felt nailed to the bed, terror thick in my throat. Then the figure spoke, a voice like splintering wood. Wrong room. The door slammed shut on its own, the lock clicking back into place. The air pressure in the room shifted as if something enormous had just passed through without making a sound. My body broke free from its paralysis and I scrambled to the bathroom, flipping on the light. The tiny space was just as grimy as the rest of the room, cracked tiles, a flickering bulb, and a stained mirror above the sink. I gripped the counter, trying to steady my breathing, avoiding my own reflection. But the moment I dared to look up, my stomach dropped. The mirror didn't reflect me. Instead, I saw the bed, but someone else was lying in it. I blinked hard, but the image didn't vanish. A figure, identical to me in every way, was sprawled across the mattress, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Its mouth twitched ever so slightly, as if it was trying to speak but couldn't. I stumbled back, slamming into the doorframe, heart ricocheting off my ribs like a trapped animal. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. One new message. I pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen was cracked from the fall earlier that day, but I could still read the text. From unknown. You're already checked in. Why won't you stay? The bathroom light flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. But the mirror. The mirror still glowed faintly, and my reflection, or whatever was pretending to be me, was now smiling. The mirror shouldn't have been glowing. The room was steeped in pitch-black silence, yet the reflection, the thing inside it, remained perfectly visible. Its grin stretched wider now, the same frozen mockery of my own face, but wrong. The eyes didn't just reflect fear, they fed on it. As if every second I spent looking at the glass gave it something to gnaw on. I needed to leave. I fumbled for the doorknob, but the air had turned thick again, syrupy with the oppressive weight of something unseen. The knob wouldn't budge, it was ice-cold, slick under my fingers, as though someone had just gripped it from the other side. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another message. From unknown. The door won't help. You're already inside. My stomach twisted violently. Suddenly, from somewhere deep inside the motel, a low groan echoed through the walls. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was organic, like the strained creak of old wood bending under something heavy. Or a throat clearing in the dark. I forced myself to stop staring at the mirror and lunged for the door again, yanking as hard as I could. Nothing. The tap-tap-tap returned, this time crawling across the ceiling above me. I could hear the delicate drag of fingers or nails skittering from one end of the room to the other. The soft scrape followed a deliberate pattern, circling directly above wherever I moved. I stepped away from the door, scanning for anything that could help me break out. That's when my eyes landed on the dresser. The bottom drawer was slightly open. I didn't open it. With no better plan, I approached it cautiously, grabbing the nearest heavy object, a rusted lamp, and yanked the drawer fully open. Inside, there was no clothing. No forgotten belongings from past guests. Only photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe more, jammed into the cramped space. I picked one up with trembling fingers. The edges were curled and brittle with age, the image faded almost beyond recognition. But I could still make out the scene. The same bed I had just been lying on. The same stained curtains behind it. And on the bed was a man, eyes open, mouth twisted, in a silent scream. I shoved the photo back and grabbed another, this one newer. The colors hadn't faded yet, and I could see the face more clearly now. It was the man from the rusty pickup truck outside. His body was sprawled across the mattress, limbs bent at impossible angles. His face, twisted, frozen in pure agony, stared straight at the camera as though he knew someone or something had taken the picture while he was still alive. I dropped the photo while rising in my throat. That's when I heard the voice again. Not a whisper this time, but something clearer, closer. You're next. The ceiling creaked louder now, and something heavy thudded onto the floor outside the bathroom door. I barely had time to react before the lights snapped back on and the mirror reflection was gone. But the door was open. Not the front door. Not the one leading out to freedom. The bathroom door. I turned slowly, hard in my throat. The empty bathroom waited beyond the frame, but the reflection had left something behind. A set of fresh, wet footprints on the tile floor. They weren't mine. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the dresser as the air in the room seemed to tighten, pressing against me, squeezing my chest. The footprints led out of the bathroom, stopping right next to where I stood. I couldn't hear anything, couldn't feel anything, but deep in my bones, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. My phone vibrated in my pocket again. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see. But some morbid instinct forced my hand. From unknown. Look behind you. No. I wouldn't look. The tapping resumed, this time from the inside of the bathroom mirror. A crack suddenly split across the glass, jagged and unnatural like a spiderweb spreading across the surface. A shadow moved behind it, tall, thin, impossible. I could feel its presence inching closer, something ancient and starved that had learned to wear the faces of those who stayed here too long. And then, the room phone rang. A harsh, shrill sound that nearly stopped my heart. The old rotary phone on the nightstand buzzed angrily, the noise slicing through the oppressive silence like a blade. I didn't want to answer. Every instinct in my body screamed, don't pick it up. But the ringing didn't stop. I reached for it slowly, every breath shallow and ragged, and lifted the receiver to my ear. Silence. Then breathing. Not mine. Heavy, labored, wet breathing, like lungs filling with something thicker than air. I tried to hang up, but my hand wouldn't move. The phone felt glued to my ear. The breathing grew louder, closer. And then, words. Room 13 is ready for you now. There isn't a room 13. Before I could react, the line went dead and every light in the room exploded. Shards of glass rained down from the ceiling fixture, the bulb above the bathroom shattered in a brilliant flash, and suddenly everything was black again. But this time, the darkness wasn't empty. A cold breath grazed the back of my neck. I turned around slowly, every muscle in my body resisting. The mirror was no longer cracked. It was whole again, reflecting the room perfectly, but I wasn't in it. Instead, the reflection showed the bed. And on that bed, I was lying there, motionless, eyes open and glassy, mouth stretched in a silent scream. But I wasn't dead. I could feel it. I was trapped. My reflection blinked once, twice, and then started to smile. The real horror wasn't that I might die in this room. It was that I might never leave it. I wasn't in control of my body anymore. That thing lying on the bed in the mirror, it wasn't just a reflection. It was wearing my skin, breathing with my lungs, blinking with my eyes. The worst part? I could feel everything it did. Every slow breath. Every twitch of a finger. Like I was buried somewhere deep beneath the surface, screaming through layers of flesh that no one could hear. But the room wasn't done with me. The phone, the real phone, let out a low, distorted click. It wasn't supposed to ring again. I turned toward it slowly, every inch of my body screaming to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The receiver, still dangling from the hook, swayed gently like a pendulum. I didn't touch it this time. I didn't have to. The voice came through the crackling speaker, clearer now. Room 13 is ready. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breath. There's no room 13, I reminded myself. But the motel had other plans. The wall opposite the bed began to shift. At first, it was subtle like a ripple across the surface of old paint. Then the drywall split, forming a jagged line that stretched from the ceiling to the stained carpet below. A door emerged, tall, narrow, and painted the color of old blood. There was no number on it. But I knew what it was. Room 13. The air thickened with the stench of mildew and decay, like something had been sealed away for too long, left to rot. Against every survival instinct left in me, I approached the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob, ice cold, pulsing beneath my palm like a heartbeat. The door swung open on its own. Inside was not another motel room. It was a hallway long, impossibly narrow, stretching far beyond the physical limits of the building. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one cracked and stained, reflecting fragmented images of things I didn't want to understand. Shadows moved in those shards, too fast to focus on, too slow to ignore. I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me, leaving me sealed in this endless corridor of glass and darkness. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, like I was walking through a void that remembered every sound ever made. And then the whispers began. Soft at first. Familiar voices. You shouldn't have stayed. You don't belong here. It already knows your name. The reflections in the mirrors shifted. I stopped walking, heart hammering against my ribs as I stared into the glass nearest to me. It showed a version of myself, but changed. My reflection was smiling. That same predatory grin from earlier, stretched too wide for any human face. Its eyes were wrong, pitch black, endless, like twin holes bored into the fabric of reality. Then it moved. Not mimicking me. Moving on its own. It pressed a hand against the inside of the mirror, palm flat against the glass. I stumbled back, but my reflection didn't stop, it was trying to push through. The glass rippled under its touch like liquid mercury. I ran. The hallway stretched on forever, every mirror now filled with those smiling versions of myself, all pressing against the glass, all reaching for me. Whispers turned into guttural chants, overlapping voices that weren't speaking words but promises. Promises of what would happen if I stopped running. I didn't stop. Then, suddenly, silence. I skidded to a halt. The mirrors were gone. I found myself standing in front of a single wooden door, ancient and splintered, with a tarnished brass handle. Burned into the wood were 3 numbers. 13. I hesitated, breath shallow and rapid. But behind me, the hallway began to collapse. The mirrors shattered one by one, glass exploding outward as shadows crawled free from the shards, dragging themselves toward me like smoke with claws. I had no choice. I threw the door open. Inside, the air was thick with rot and dust, choking me as I stepped in. The room was wrong. The walls were covered in photographs, the same kinds I'd seen in the drawer, but these were newer. Fresh. All of them were of me. Sitting on the bed. Standing in front of the mirror. Staring directly into the camera with eyes that didn't belong to me. And then I noticed the smell. Something sweet and metallic. I followed the scent to the far end of the room where a figure sat in the corner. The light was too dim to see details, but as I moved closer, my stomach turned to ice. It was the man from the pickup truck. The one I'd seen in the photo. But this wasn't just a corpse. His eyes were wide open, glassy but aware, darting frantically from side to side. His lips trembled, trying to form words. I leaned in closer against every instinct I had left. It wears you. The words were wet and broken. Gets in your head becomes you. His body twitched violently as if something inside was trying to push its way out. His skin rippled unnaturally, the veins beneath pulsing like worms just under the surface. And then his face changed. His features shifted, melting and reforming like hot wax. In seconds, it wasn't his face anymore. It was mine. I stumbled back in horror, slamming into the wall behind me. The photographs trembled on their nails, some falling to the floor and shattering like glass. The air felt like it was closing in, thick with heat and pressure. Then the shadows arrived. Pouring through the doorway, writhing masses of darkness with too many limbs, too many eyes, too many teeth. They swarmed the body in the corner, my face still stretched across its skin, and devoured it without a sound. The motel wasn't just feeding on fear. It was collecting identities. I sprinted for the door, but the room twisted around me. Every step forward pulled me deeper in, the walls stretching outward as though I was running inside a massive throat, drawing me closer to some unseen stomach ready to digest everything I was. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. From unknown. You can't run. You're part of the collection now. Suddenly, the floor gave way beneath me and I was falling. I landed hard on something soft and cold, a bed. My bed. I was back in room 12. The mirror was intact. The reflection smiled at me. But this time it wasn't trapped behind the glass. It blinked once, then reached out from the other side. I couldn't move. The reflection, the thing that looked like me, wasn't behind the glass anymore. It pressed one hand against the inside of the mirror, but the glass rippled outward like the surface of water. Then the hand broke through, fingertips stretching into my world. I stumbled backward until my spine hit the door. There was nowhere left to run. Every muscle screamed at me to fight, but deep down, I knew, you can't fight something that already knows you, your face, your thoughts, every crack in your mind. The hand reached farther out, slick with something dark and thick. The air grew icy as it gripped the frame of the mirror, pulling itself closer to the edge. Its eyes found mine, my eyes, but hollow and endless now. The grin stretched wider than human skin should allow. You're already inside. The lights flickered, then snapped off entirely. In the suffocating dark, I could hear breathing, not mine, not close, but deep, resonant. Like the walls themselves were inhaling, preparing to collapse inward. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket, but I couldn't bring myself to answer it. The room smelled like rot now. Wet wood, mold thick in the air, and something worse, burned plastic, like flesh cooked by electricity. Suddenly, a different light bloomed to life, the TV. I didn't turn it on. The old, static-covered screen flickered to reveal me sitting on the bed. Except, I wasn't moving. The image on the screen stared at me through the grainy fuzz of static, eyes wide open, mouth hanging slack, drool trailing from the corner of its lips. I blinked. The figure on the screen didn't. Then the static cleared, just enough for me to see what was behind the version of me on the TV. A shadow. It moved without moving, a blot of pure black in the shape of something almost human but too tall, too thin. Limbs stretched too long, as if the walls couldn't contain it. The reflection's voice came again, closer now. It's waiting for the vacancy. That's when I understood. The motel didn't just trap people. It replaced them. The whispers, the shadows in the mirrors, the copies, all of it was part of something bigger, older than this place. Every photo in that drawer, every reflection in the glass, they weren't memories. They were trophies. Souls swallowed whole, leaving their shells behind to check out while something else moved into their bodies. I had to escape before it took my place completely. I lunged for the door, unlocked now, though I hadn't touched it. The hallway outside was bathed in flickering yellow light, long shadows stretching out from the ceiling lamps reaching across the stained carpet like skeletal fingers. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the corridor toward the front desk, my breath ragged and shallow. The tap-tap-tap followed me on the walls, the ceiling inside my skull. Every door I passed creaked as if something behind them was trying to force its way out. The lobby was empty. The night manager was gone. The bell on the front desk sat silently, but something instinct made me reach out and press it anyway. The sharp ding echoed through the hollow space. Nothing. Then movement. A soft shuffle of feet behind the counter. I leaned forward slowly, too afraid to see what waited for me on the other side. It was a mirror. A long, thin mirror tucked behind the front desk, angled just enough to catch my reflection. Except it wasn't me. It was him. The night manager. His pale face leaned closer to the glass, eyes too black, smile too wide. And in the reflection's background, room 12 still sat open. The bed was full now. My body, the real me, was still lying there, perfectly still, mouth stretched open in a silent, endless scream. A phone rang in the background. I could hear it through the glass. Not from the lobby. From inside the reflection. I didn't think. I ran. The glass around me seemed to pulse with every step, stretching shadows longer and wider until the whole motel felt like it was made of nothing but endless reflections. The walls pulsed with trapped whispers, voices of every person who'd ever checked in and never left. The front door was in sight now, the vacancy sign's crimson glow bleeding through the dirty glass. The letters flickered wildly like the motel itself was panicking, trying to stop me. 5 feet away. 3. 1. I grabbed the door handle and felt fingers wrap around my wrist. I turned. The night manager stood inches from my face, his grin now splitting his cheeks open, revealing rows of yellow, splintered teeth beneath. His voice was made of static and broken glass. You can't leave without checking out. I wrenched my arm free and threw myself through the door. Silence. I was outside. The night air hit me like a fist, cold, sharp, real. The neon sign buzzed weakly above me, casting deep shadows across the cracked pavement. The pickup truck was still parked there, rusted and silent. I didn't stop. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys, heart jackhammering in my chest. The engine roared to life on the third try. In the rearview mirror, the motel stood quiet and still. The front door never opened. The reflection never followed. I drove.